Now that we have basic objectives working for our quest system, let's dive into something a little bit more complicated and a little bit more expandable, most importantly, and that is being able to nest objectives. What does that mean? We're going to go from just simply one objective, as we have right now. We can pick up a quest over here, and that quest just has the objective, go to this other trigger box, it triggers, and that's kind of all there is to it. We're gonna make something that will allow us to go to maybe go through 3 trigger boxes, or 5, or 16, either sequentially or in any random given order. And for something like that, we will need to set up a objective that can hold multiple other objectives. And this is kind of where all of the things that we have set up so far are going to really come together to form the backbone of this system. So let's go to our base objective class and create a child blueprint of it. And we'll call this a objective collection, because it's going to be a collection of objectives. It's very descriptive in its naming. Now, there's going to be a lot that we have to go through here today. So if at the end of this video you're feeling a little bit lost and you feel like needing to watch things through again, that will make sense. As a matter of fact, after watching this video, maybe going back to the first part of this series in its entirety and going through that again with a little bit more context of how things are going to click into place will give you a better understanding of the system as a whole. But for now, let's just get started on implementing all of the objective collection stuff. So the most important part of which is going to be some variables. So we set up our sub objectives, which will of course be a variable of type base objective. Here we go, base objective, and it's going to be an array. And the wonderful thing about this is because objective collection itself is a child of base objective, this sub-objective array can itself hold multiple different objective collections, which then, all of which could in theory hold objective collections. So you can stack this infinitely as much as you want or need to. Now, there's going to be a handful of things that we need to implement and override. The first and most important of which is activate objective. We can implement that as a function. If you prefer, because it doesn't have a return value, you can actually go into the event graph and activate objective here. And you can call it as an event or implement it as an event instead. This way you can more easily bind to event dispatches and that kind of stuff. If you do that though, important is to right click on this thing and add call to parent function, because the parent function is the thing that's actually going to flip the ball here to being set to active. So when we activate this objective collection, what we want to do is we want to first and foremost get our sub-objectives that we have here, and we want to for each loop over them, because every one of these sub-objectives is going to need to be watched. And what I mean by that is every one of these we need to bind to updates objective. And we will bind to that with a custom event here, and we'll call that a forward update objective. Because all that this is going to do is when any of the sub-objectives get updated, it also needs to update this objective. This is mostly to get things like progress bars working properly in the future. If you're not working with progress bars, this is not entirely super important, but you might as well set this up. So when any of its objectives get updated, we call on update objective here as well. And the thing that we're updating will be just self, just in case that ever becomes relevant. So now we are bound to all that. And because we're forwarding all this, again, this will work a couple of nested layer deeps. Because let's just think about how that works real quick, right? If we have a quest here that has a objective collection, that has an objective collection, that has an objective collection, that has an objective collection, that has a handful of objectives. When this objective over here, let's make this green, when this objective over here updates, it's going to send a signal to its collection to update, which is going to send a signal to its collection to update, which is going to send a signal to its collection to update, which is going to send a signal to the topmost collection in this case to update. So this can go as deep as you would like. Now, after we do that, we get into the complicated bits. So we're going to make a variable here, and this variable will be whether or not we need to do these objectives in order. So this is going to be a simple bool, just a singular value. And both of these actually need to be instance editable and exposed on spawn, because that's how we're going to be setting these. So for each objective collection, we can either choose to allow these to have to be done sequentially, so in the order that they appear in the array, or in any given order at all. And we need to implement logic for both of those. So if we take the ordered variable here and we put in a branch, we're going to need to create two different paths for this. Honestly, the easiest of which is if we don't do anything ordered, because if we don't do anything ordered, we just activate all of the objectives inside of this, and that's that. So let's do that first. We get our sub-objectives again, and we simply do a for each loop over all those. And with those, we very easily just activate objective. That will activate all of these sub-objectives, which if one of those is its own objective collection, that objective collection then has its own ordered variable as well. So you very much can make something like this, right? Where we have like 3 objective collections as our objective collection for like the quest as a whole, and say, well, this one needs to be done in order. So we need to do number 1 first, then number 2 unlocks, then number 3 unlocks. But for this collection over here, when we unlock it, we just like unlock all 3 at the same time, or all 5 at the same time, or whatever. And just as before, this is infinitely nestable as much as you need it to be. So for each individual collection, you can say whether or not they are ordered or sequential. Anyway, after we activate the objective, we're going to bind to finish objective as well, because we want to keep track of when they are finished, of course. Because when any of these objectives finish, of course, that's also going to mean that we update this objective collection, because suddenly one of the things inside here has finished, which then will mean that our completion percentage of this objective collection, the quest as a whole, is going to need to be updated. So let's make that a custom event, and we'll just call this object finished or something like that. And here we, for the first time, actually use the objective that is getting provided in, because as you remember, anytime we call onUpdate or onFinished, we're providing in the actual objective, but we haven't been using that up until now. Here we actually start using that, because once it is finished, we actually want to unbind from this as well. So we unbind from finish objective, this very thing. So we're first binding to it when they first get activated, but then when they are finished, we just want a real quick unbind so that it doesn't fire again in any like weird scenarios. And then anytime any of these sub-objectives are finished, we want to check whether or not this objective as a whole is finished, for which we're going to need to make a quick function. So let's make a function, something like check objective finished. Let's call it check objective collection finished, just to be sure that everything is very descriptive. And we'll just get our objective collection, which we're going to for each loop over. And here we're going to do a neat little trick, is for each one of these, we're going to check whether or not it has been marked as completed, because we have a value for it being completed or not. And if at any point this returns false, we're going to return the function, which means that we prematurely end it. Meaning that if we make it all the way through the for each loop, we didn't get any sub-objectives that were marked as complete being false, which in turn means every sub-objective has been completed. So then we can run the finish objective function that we made before, which again just does in the base implementation, set the thing to completed, call itself out as a completed, and in this case prints a string just for debugging purposes. But it'll only be allowed to call this finish objective if all of these sub-objectives are finished. So whenever we run this function, it's going to check through all of its sub-objectives, and we run that every time any of these sub-objectives get finished. So we bind on objective finished for each one of the sub-objectives, and in there we check objective collection finished. Now, no matter what happens, after we complete this for each loop, and after any of these objectives get updated, what we for sure want to do is we want to call update it. So call objective update, and the objective that we're going to update, of course, will, as always, be a reference to self. And that will be called after we complete the for each loop, but also at the end of this onObjective finished event that is bound to every sub-objective. And here you can see we start doing some double bindings. We're binding effectively the same thing to whenever something is being updated and whenever something is being finished. In this case, we want to update this objective collection in either case, but sometimes you might only want to send a message through when something is being updated but has not yet been finished, or something specifically has been finished. Like in this case, we want to check whether or not the objective collection as a whole is finished. That's only going to be relevant if any of the sub-objectives are finished. If any of the sub-objectives just get updated, but haven't been finished off, there's no need to go through and check whether or not this objective collection is now finished. So that is the code for unordered quests. So this is just going to unlock every single one of your sub-objectives in this collection at once. Now, the slightly more tricky version is going to be things that have to be done in order. It's only going to, by default, unlock the first entry in your array, and only once that objective has been completed will it start adding in the next objective on the list. So for this, we'll make a new function as well, and we'll call this activate next objective. And we're going to do a pretty similar trick here with the for each loop as before, but we're going to do it slightly differently. So let's get our sub-objectives, and of course we're going to for each loop over those, and for all of these we're going to check, hey, which one is not yet set to being active? So we're going to check get is active, and the first one it finds that is not yet active, we're going to activate, and then we're going to break out of this for each loop by doing an early return. So we get our array element and we activate that objective only if it is not yet been activated. And then we also, from that, bind to finished for that specific objective. And this is going to be a input parameter for this function. So that's something that you probably don't see a lot of, generally speaking. Passing through these event dispatcher, these delegates as like parameters into functions, but it's a thing that you like fully can do and it will work. So we can bind to this, and then in the event graph, we can actually implement an event that this is going to bind to. And then of course, we add in a return node to end the function so that it doesn't endlessly keep going and activate everything. That said though, if we are running this, and we've made it through all the way, and everything is already active, assuming that we built the rest of our code in a sensible way, this function will only ever be called in response to the previous objective being completed. Meaning that if we make it all the way through this for each loop, we also have finished off the objective collection as a whole. So then we can finish objective. Now, if you start putting this activate next objective in places aside from what we're showing in this tutorial series, that's entirely up to you, but do be aware that there is this check built in with the for each loop for if we make it to the end of it, we're going to finish this objective collection as a whole. In which case, what you might want to do is you might want to check objective collection finished. This is a little bit wasteful because after the end of doing a full for each loop, we're going to then do another full for each loop again. This is a little bit more safe to do because it's never going to accidentally finish off your quest by just unlocking an objective if you're using this function improperly at any point. Just using the finish objective here makes it slightly more CPU friendly. We're going to do this because it is a little bit more safe. Time to go back to our event graph, however. And there we're going to, if ordered is true, we're going to, and in here, if ordered is true, we're going to activate next objective right away. And this is just going to go through and check every single index in your array. And seeing as how nothing has been activated yet, it's going to just immediately activate index number 0, which is the very first objective of this list. With this event input, we're going to add in a custom event, and we'll call this something like objective completed, which is different from onObjective finished, apparently. Maybe name these a little bit better. This is onObjective sequential completed or something like that. We're going to do something very similar. We will unbind the finished objective, and that's going to unbind from the very event that is calling it, so that we don't accidentally like call it 2 or 3 different times. And then immediately we're going to activate the next objective. So whenever this fires, when an objective is completed, it's going to try to activate the next objective, which is also, of course, going to go back and bind to the same thing here. And for both of these also, we can hook that up to the call on update objective, because in both cases, a new objective or sub-objective has been activated. That is, to put it mildly, quite a lot of things happening there, but this is the backbone of our system now. This is the most important central bit that everything else is going to be functioning off of. So let's just take a step back before we implement any other weird stuff, because believe me, there is multiple different things that we can still do in this objective collection to improve it. Let's just go through and see how we would implement an objective collection. So in order to do that, we're going to go back into our base quest, and where we before just had our objective variable here from initialize objectives as a normal base objective, we're going to change that to an objective collection instead. Because effectively any quest that we want to make, we want to start off with the first objective being a collection so that we can make multiple collections of that if we want to. Which also means that initialize objectives itself is going to need to be updated to return a objective collection as well, because otherwise these won't connect up properly. And everything else here can still stay the same, because in the end, activate objective is just a function that we are overriding and adding some more stuff to with the collection. But it is a function that still exists on both the base and the collection. So if we go back into our test quest over here, we have our construct location event, where that's no longer quite what we want it to be. What we're going to want to do is we want to construct another object here, and the object that we're going to be constructing will be a collection instead. So an objective collection. And this will, if we just refresh the node real quick, still have an objective name. This will be your first quests. It will have an objective ID. So this will be collection 1. For instance. Show a progress bar, we're going to just ignore that for now. This is going to be an unordered quest, so we can do it in any way, shape or form that we want, or an unordered collection, I should say. But the sub-objectives that we make are going to be important here. So the way we set that up is we just pull off of this sub-objectives array input, and we make an array. Now let's make an array with 3 different objectives to complete. So we effectively just get this location objective, because that's the only type of objective that we have as of right now. And we duplicate that over 2 more times to create different objectives. And here you can start seeing the location objective is just a template, right? It's just a type of objective that we can create. We can now link this location objective to 3 different trigger boxes, which we'll do. So location 1, location 2, and location 3. And each one of these objectives can be linked to a different one of these trigger boxes. Of course, it is important to make sure that the quest IDs are not the same. So let's call this test quest objective 2 and test quest objective 3. And we'll call this walk on circle. For now, that doesn't really matter because we can't see it yet, but that's going to be relevant at some point. This will be walk on the ramp. And this will be, I think I called it walk upstairs in the example projects or something like that. So we'll just call it the same thing. And now we can plug all of these outputs from these construction nodes into this make array in the order that we want these to complete it in, if this is an ordered quest. So 0 is going to be the first thing that it does, 1 is going to be the second, and so on and so forth. This is also going to be the order that they show up in either way, even if you don't check ordered quests. And then the return value from the objective collection is going to be the return value that we put into this node. But you can see how this is very expandable, right? Because we can very much, instead of just making these 3 simple location objectives, anything that we want to put into this array can itself be an objective collection with its own separate objectives under it. Each one of which could be an objective collection. I've gone over this point a million times. I'm sure by now you get it. So if we compile this and we go back into the world, we can now see that we have a handful of new objectives that we can assign. So let's create a trigger box here and a trigger box like right there. And then I think the first one was the circle, the second one was the ramp, and then the third one was walking up here, I believe. And quest ID, we'll just give this an ID of your first quest, something unimportant really. And here we can go in collect a quest. It has a hello print string, which is hard to see, but now we can do these in any order we want. Objective 2, Objective 1, and then Objective 3 over here. So that's how that works. But now, and this is the wonderful thing, if we go back into our test quest and we say, now actually this collection that I'm making here, which is the entire collection of objectives in this case, I want those to be ordered. And now it's only going to allow us to do these in the order that we provide them into this make array. So the circle first, the ramp second, and the staircase last. So if we go and try to do the ramp first, you will note that it doesn't actually complete the ramp because it's not actually looking out for the ramp yet. That objective hasn't been activated yet because now they're getting activated one at a time in order. So this one, however, will work. And now that I've completed objective 1, it is looking out for objective 2 and going onto the ramp will complete it because now that is active. Now that I've completed objective 2, going up here will complete objective 3. And now that we have all that in place, we can actually look out for our master objective collection, which is the objective collection that eventually gets returned in this node. So let's go into our base quest. The thing that on start quest, we init objectives, then we set that to a variable. The reason, by the way, that we set it to a variable is to do with garbage collection. You need to have a reference to objects to keep them from being garbage collected. So as long as we have variables referring to them, Unreal is going to leave them alone and not destroy the objects because we're still working with them. But you can see that when we finish this objective, it will complete the quest and call on quest completed. Which if you want to, you could make a variable here for quest completed or whatever. That might become relevant a little bit later on. We'll see if we actually end up doing that or not. But on our quest component here, we can then check in our add quest. We have on quest completed that runs complete quests, which removes it from active quests and puts it into finished quests. So if we go into our event graph real quick and we go into event tick, what I want to do just to show you is I'm going to for each loop over both of these. So we get the keys out of the active quest, and then I for each loop over those, and then I want to find every single quest from this, and then I'm just going to print the name or the ID of those individual quests. And I will actually do that for the duration of delta seconds so that it doesn't spam everything entirely full. And I'm going to do the same thing with the finished quests. So after completion, I do a for each loop over the finished quests. And we'll do the active quests in green and the finished quests we'll do in red so that we can still like differentiate them fairly easily. So this one we'll do in a more red color. Also duration is delta seconds. So now my component will be printing out all of its active quests and all of its finished quests every frame. So you can see I don't have any active quests, but now that I overlap with this, I have my first quest here, which I need to complete obviously in order as we discussed. So let's complete that. And you can see this is going to get moved to the finished quests because now it is printing in red. So I have officially finished this quest, meaning that we have a functional quest system. We have no way to show any of that yet, which is going to be a huge part of what we do moving forward, and then we add in like other fun features. But the basis and the central mechanics of our quest system are now in place. And for the full course, if you're watching this in the future, it should be all up on the YouTube channel already. But if you're watching this shortly after it was uploaded, there will be a link down below in the description to the Patreon where you can find the full course. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. A huge thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,